This episode may contain language or discussions that may be offensive or triggering. Refer to the episode summary for details. So, welcome to She.Confidential podcast. My name is Charlene Ketchum, and today I'm very excited because I am chatting with Kim Hunt. She is the executive director of the Pride Action Tank, and she is doing some important work that we really need to talk about and want to put on everybody's radar. So, thank you so much, Ms. Hunt, for chatting with me today.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you for reaching out to me. I was really honored when I got your email.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that means a lot. Thank you. I wanted to talk to you because for a while I've heard about the movement to decriminalize laws that target people who have been diagnosed with HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. And when I heard about the work that's happened in Illinois to actually make that happen, I thought, "Oh, more people need to know about this because if more people know about it, more people can support it and they'll understand the importance of it and they won't have that initial fear that a lot of people get." Because even when I talked to a friend of mine and I said, "Oh, did you hear about what happened in Illinois?" And she said, "Well, so now they're making it legal for people to give folks AIDS and not be in trouble." And that's the first thing people, that's what a lot of people think of when they hear that. So they don't understand what decriminalize means. They don't understand why these laws came to be, and they don't understand how they're hurting people. And so before we dive in, I want to share like two stories. I have been doing a lot of research to prepare for our chat. And I read about two situations with two individuals that were just heartbreaking. One is a single mom. She actually was incarcerated. She was in prison, single mom of four, who disclosed to her partner her status and told him, you might want to wear a condom. He declined to wear a condom. He did not contract HIV, but still she was tried and sentenced to prison. He testified on her behalf, saying, "I don't think that this should happen to her. She disclosed her status to me. I chose not to use a condom," but she was still imprisoned. And then another man at the age of 30 was imprisoned because he did not disclose his status to his partner. And so but his partner did not contract HIV and they used condoms, but he was still incarcerated for it. And so it's almost like at this point we have to question, what are we punishing people for? And so that's what I really like us to talk about, what it means to decriminalize these laws and the work that you've done in the last few years to kind of make this happen.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this topic up and bringing those real life stories to this conversation. I'll say that the work that was done in Illinois, like the work that happens across the country, is done by many, many people, many coalitions, many organizations, and individuals working together, including folks who are living with HIV and AIDS, folks who have been the victims of these laws as well, or the targets of these laws. A lot of people don't know that these laws exist, and they were created at a time when we didn't know a lot about HIV and how it was transmitted, and fear was the basis of a lot of the laws when they were first put on the books, and that continues to be the case today because they don't these laws are not keeping up with the science of HIV, not keeping up with all the biomedical advances that have been made, and all that has been learned about HIV over the years. And there are 32 states that have these laws explicitly on the books. So that's a lot of folks who are impacted by these laws. And HIV and AIDS are communicable diseases that we don't talk nearly enough about, especially considering the impact that they have on Black and Brown communities. We Black folks are in the really high numbers when it comes to looking at the proportion of folks who have HIV and AIDS. but I will say it is not a death sentence anymore. It's people, who are watching episodes of Pose and other shows that sort of go back to the early days of AIDS. That's not what it has to be anymore. So in Illinois, we had this coalition called the Illinois HIV Action Alliance, which consists of, as I said, many organizations and individuals who are concerned about this issue. Illinois has had law like this on the books since the 80s or 90s. It was last modernized, so tweaked a bit in 2012. But the thinking among the community was in Illinois with a Democratic governor, a Democratic majority, supermajority in the House, and a majority in the Senate. Now was the time to really push to. Initially, we thought about modernizing, but then we thought, no, this is the only communicable disease that is that folks could be criminalized for having. And it's just it induces stigma. It doesn't follow science. It actually hurts public health efforts to make sure that folks are tested and in care, because there was if you knew your status, you could be a victim of these laws, right? And so having that ignorance about your status in some ways protected you. So we wanted to remove all of that from the table and say, let's just wipe this out completely. So it took a lot of work. We had a team of 3 or 4 lobbyists from the different policy organizations, one of them being my colleague Timothy Jackson, who is a Black gay man who living with HIV and a phenomenal lobbyist with AIDS Foundation Chicago. Was the chief wrangler, if you will, of all the legislators. Found some amazing sponsors for the bill. State Representative Carol Ammons and State Senator Robert Peters, and with the team of folks and other legislators pushed to make this happen. And as a result, the governor got a bill to sign, which he did on July 27th of this year, and it made Illinois only the second state to totally repeal its HIV criminalization law, the first state being Texas in 1994, which is really interesting given the reproductive health stuff going on there right now. That always blows my mind. It's a weird state.
Wow. And one thing I want to make clear to the audience when we talk about the adverse impact of these laws is that they discourage people from knowing their status. Because if you know, then you can be criminalized.
That's right. And I just don't think people fully understand what that means. You gave 2 really kind of typical examples of folks just moving about their lives, who are suddenly find themselves in prison because they have HIV. And it's a situation where you're bringing the wrong tool to the game. It's like bringing a bat to a football game, right? That's not the equipment you need. This is a public health issue, not a criminalization issue. And so we need to treat HIV like we treat other public health issues, like COVID, like diabetes, like any number of illnesses and communicable diseases and things that impact our health. We need to encourage folks to know their status. We need to encourage folks um, to get in care, and we also need to encourage folks to avail themselves of the medications that are available. If you don't have HIV, you can take PrEP, and that is 99% effective in preventing you from getting HIV. And I want to stress this because a lot of Black folks don't know about PrEP. And PrEP is readily available for anyone, male, female, non binary, everything. You can go to your doctor and get PrEP. Now, where to get it is often a challenge depending on where you live. But there are many federally qualified health centers, for example, where this is readily available. But any doctor can prescribe PrEP to folks, and that is a preventative medication.
And is that a one-time thing, or is it something a daily
It's a pill that folks take daily, and they need to talk to their doctor because sometimes people are dating, sometimes they're not. So if you don't need to be on the medication, you don't have to be on the medication. There is a period of time where it needs to be in your system. So plan ahead, y'all.
But this is why that information is so important, because we don't know what we don't know. And we have these laws that we think, because at the end of the day, I think about the laws that are on the books now, and we need more of them actually, that criminalize people recording sex acts and uploading. That's a new thing that's exploding in recent years in these voyeur laws and privacy violations. And we need those things. But a lot of times people don't even understand that it's illegal just to even to own these things. If you have something that was uploaded without someone's consent, and you're sharing it with other people, particularly when it concerns minors, then now you're distributing child pornography. People aren't aware of the nuances with this. And I didn't know a lot of it until I was working in juvenile law and I was working with teenagers. And that's a big thing with kids now. The phones, and they're recording everything. And I realized that a teenager who records a sex act is now a producer of child pornography. If they share it with someone, they're distributing it. These are some serious penalties, but people don't know. They don't know. And so we need to make people aware. And those are, laws that I support. I don't agree with the way they're applied to young people, however, but that's a great example of we don't know until it hits close to home. And in my instance, I've met and worked with young people who were impacted by these laws that I don't think were appropriately applied. I didn't know about those laws until I started working with young people and discovered that, a 14-year-old who thinks he has his girlfriend's consent to record this is now a producer of child pornography. And that puts them on a sex offender list. That's something that they carry for the rest of their lives. But most parents don't know about this. Most kids certainly don't know about it. And I get that there's so much for us to keep up with out here, but this is why it's important for us to have these kind of conversations so that people are informed about the laws that may be hurting them and the people they love and the other people in their community. And the same thing applies to this. So when we talk about these laws that criminalize just having HIV, which I don't think we do that with any other sexually transmitted infection, do we? So this is the only one that you could go to prison just for having, not infecting someone. And I want people to really understand that. This is not about whether you intentionally infected someone with HIV. This is just for having it.
Or even if you transmit it at all. There has to there, In the Illinois law there didn't have to be transmission, even though transmission was in the title of the law. That wasn't a requirement. It was about disclosure, and there have been cases where folks disclose that couple broke up. The other person was upset about the breakup and claimed that there was no disclosure. Um, so, I just want to be clear that anytime you take one um, communicable disease or one public health issue, frankly, and then put it under criminal law, you're doing way more harm than good, way more harm. And these laws, because HIV is disproportionately population wise prevalent among Black and Brown folks, these laws disproportionately impact Black and Brown folks. So that's another thing to think about. And you know, like I said before, having HIV and AIDS is not a death sentence. We want to encourage folks to get tested. We want to encourage folks to be in care. We want to let people know that PrEP is available. If you don't have HIV and you are sexually active, um, it is something that you should consider taking, particularly in particular groups of individuals or engaging in certain types of sex. So yeah, there are tools out there. There's medication available. Also, it should be known that once a person who does have HIV, their viral load is suppressed, they can't transmit HIV. So even if they have it, but and it's the popular title is "You equal you," and I'm blanking on my words. Undetectable equal untransmittable. So there's just so much ignorance still out there about HIV in AIDS that we really want to remove any barriers to people learning and understanding. I remember many years ago when I was at a different organization, we were working with a local radio station that was really focused on Black folks more broadly. And I should be clear that I work in LGBTQ spaces most prevalently. And this was a mainstream radio station. So we opened our doors for them to come in and broadcast from our space, and also offered HIV testing. And people came in to be tested, and you could tell they were just so worried and upset and it was just all kinds of Black folks coming through our doors to get tested and learning about HIV, and it was so beautiful but also so disheartening to think about the miscommunication that's out there about HIV, and how some folks thinking about it is kind of stuck in another time, and there have been so many advances since then.
Yeah. So, what was the reasoning for these laws in the first place?
Oh, it was fear. You know, back in the day, folks were still struggling to understand. How the disease was transmitted. Information didn't move at the speed of light like it does now. People had to wait for newspaper articles and papers to be published, and like peer reviewed papers and medical journals and that kind of stuff. Information comes out much more quickly now, but just that fear around it. And then, lack of leadership. President Reagan didn't even mention the word HIV for well into his into the epidemic, um, and so states took it in their own hands to protect their folks. And there were things like biting and spitting that were included in these laws as acts that could lead to felony prosecutions, and that is just very low likelihood of transmitting low to zero
Yeah.
HIV in those ways. But fear took over, and even now, as we move through this time of coalitions around the country kind of deciding, do we modernize or do we repeal? And to some extent, folks were waiting to see what Illinois was, if we were going to be successful, because we began to talk about repeal a year or so ago, after getting a lot of input from community. We did focus groups, we did surveys, we did all kinds of, we call them munch and learns. So these lunchtime or dinner time conversations focusing in on various populations. But the same is happening across the country as coalitions think about, do we just try to modernize and make it a longer term effort to repeal, or do we just go for repeal because some of those same fears surface? But it is an education opportunity too.
So, for people in the audience who don't know the difference between repealing and modernizing, what are those differences?
Yeah, so a repeal is easy. So that is just wiping it off the books. So the way, in terms of a bill for repeal, the way ours looked is it took the current language and it just sh- showed the strike through of all the language. So that does not exist anymore. Once the governor signed it in July, it was effective immediately. It was completely taken off the books. A modernization is something like what happened previously in Illinois. There's language that you tweak or eliminate. So in Illinois, the biting and the spitting that I mentioned earlier, that was in the previous law. In 2012, that was struck. And one of the words that was added was intention to transmit. Um, and it's an attempt to soften and eliminate really problematic stuff. And a lot of times advocates will go the modernization route because it may be more politically expedient to do it. Um, so there's a difference between what you have to do for public policy and activism, community organizing. There's different. Policy, unfortunately, is an incremental process. Many times, we were very fortunate. The political window was open for us to go for complete repeal. Couple of years earlier, under a different administration, for example, we would not have gone for repeal. So there's a lot that plays into that decision making. But typically, a modernization is more changes to the current language or elimination of certain sections of the law.
And so, I want to talk about these laws in particular because some people may be listening and they may be thinking, I still don't see what the big deal is. And so I want to make it really clear because there is a range of these laws because again they're state specific is what people have to realize. And it can be one standard in one state and something a little bit different in others. And you mentioned the spitting and biting that was removed from Illinois, which I was trying to find anything online that talked about any cases that are documented where HIV has been transmitted via spitting or biting, and I can't find
You
anything.
won't. You won't.
It's like, really, really, y'all, really?
Yeah.
So I mention that because I think that when we lay people see these laws that are targeting populations and targeting people who have an infection or disease or illness, and there's a difference, between having an infection and having a disease. And when we talk about things related to intent, I think it's important for lay people to understand that we need to ask questions about why that's there. It's we don't want to throw everything in there under the guise of saying, "Oh, we're protecting people." So, anything if you have this particular infection or disease, we're going to throw any everything in there. Basically, any type of contact you could possibly have with a person, we'll throw that in there and criminalize it. No, we need to be asking questions as to why. Like, is that really a risk? And are we talking about intention? Because for everything else, when you look at other crimes, generally we're looking, first of all, we have an intent standard. That's not always the case with these HIV laws. When I was looking across the different states, some states don't require a deliberate intent to transmit, and that's problematic.
Yeah, I think I will say the basic premise is this should not be handled under criminal law at all. So even parsing out intent or not intent kind of takes away from the fact that this is a public health issue. Public health should not fall under criminal law. The focus should be on resources and education that um, encourage people to get tested and know their status, encourage folks to get and stay in care, encourage folks to use PrEP if that makes sense for them. There's just so many things that people can do if the stigma is taken away from HIV. And criminalization is another form of stigma. It's putting folks off to the side and saying, you are bad people because you have this virus. You are a bad person, and we don't want you anywhere near us. We don't want you a part of society just because you have this virus. You are otherwise beautiful human being just trying to live your life like everybody else. You have a virus and now you're a criminal. That makes no sense. This is about public health, and it's also about looking at people as human beings. And I think that's what often gets missed is when we start talking about um, HIV and these laws in particular. There's this assumption that there are these bad people with this virus who are going around trying to infect everybody else, and that is not the case. These these are folks. The cases you read, these are folks snatched up just in the prime of their lives, just living their lives. And so, the in my mind, the laws need to be taken off all the states' books, every last one of them, and the focus needs to be on destigmatizing HIV and making sure that all people get the care that they need.
Yeah. And for people who are looking to do the advocacy, what I found, and I don't like politics, I don't really do politics, but I have found that unfortunately there are a lot of elected officials that when you ask them to justify these laws, they can't. Just what's the reason? Show me the data. And also, what is the goal? Just asking sometimes, a lot of times, what is the objective here? What are you hoping to accomplish by not supporting repealing this law? You say you don't want to repeal this law, you don't support efforts to repeal it. So, what is the objective? What public good do you think this law is doing by being on the books? And by asking people that question as it applies to these criminalization laws, they're not going to be able to give you an acceptable response because there isn't one.
Yeah, yeah. And we found too in this, and I say this is true with any work that you any law you focus on, any advocacy campaign. These are human beings just like us. So first of all, let's not put them on a pedestal. So I say that to your viewers. Do not. These are just people just like us, and they need educating too sometimes. They just don't know. They come from communities just like we do oftentimes, and just the information for one reason or another um, isn't available, isn't heard, isn't presented in the way that is accessible to folks. So we have done a lot of education of elected officials too along the way, um, and that is time that is well worth investing in because it can be helpful in a number of ways. But to your point about asking the question, I think sometimes the goals can be what we agree on. So in some cases, folks think that they are um, protecting the public. Their desire is to, um, prevent the spread of HIV. I think that preventing the spread of HIV is a good thing, right? So how do we do that? We don't do that by throwing people in jail. We do that by taking the stigma away and by making sure that those resources, especially in communities where we see these rates really going up or not changing at all, um, where are the resources for those communities? Where is the HIV education? Where are the prevention dollars going? How are we not telling people about PrEP? Black and brown people in particular, are we not telling people about PrEP? Something that is 99% effective in preventing transmission of HIV. If you are not preventing transmission, preventing folks who are HIV negative from acquiring the virus. So, you know, we can agree on the goal. The tactic may be different.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's where you start. When you ask the question that you asked of the, suggest folks ask, what is your goal for this? Start from there. We may have a shared goal. So now let's talk about how we work together towards achieving that goal in a way that doesn't harm people.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that education component because I genuinely believe that people who are elected officials, they're public servants, most of them are in it because they actually care. They care about the community. And there are so many issues. There's so many issues. There's so many. And so I do not want to minimize that there's a lot on their plate. There's so many issues to deal with. But I think that, when we emphasize educating people, then we don't demonize those folks either, And it's important because it doesn't need to be like us against them and they're bad people because they're allowing these laws to be on the books. They may not even realize it. I mean, we can't assume that just because you're an elected official, you're aware or aware of the impacts of the law.
Exactly. I mean, you're spot on. Illinois, for example, has one of the busiest general assemblies in the country. Most states pass like 30, 40 bills a session. We pass over 200. It's crazy how much is going on in the state capitol when it comes to reviewing and voting on various laws. So to your point, some of them don't know, and it's up to us to bring it to their attention. And that's the beauty of having coalitions with multiple organizations and individuals who are looking at these issues, and finding ways to engage the broader community too, both in the education but also on the advocacy side, because we have ways to for people to easily reach out to their state representatives and senators for each of our bills. I mentioned the educational programs that we do online, especially as the legislation was moving through session. Um, so as individuals, it's hard to do that. But when it's a group of folks and a group of organizations, then it becomes an easier lift.
So, for people in the audience who hear this and they want to learn more about how they can get involved, what should they do in terms of what can they do as individuals, and what can they do to support organizations like yours in this work?
So I will say, if folks want to learn more about HIV criminalization laws, there's a great website called Cero Project. That's SERO project.com. And they actually track the laws across the country and also provide technical assistance and information, lets folks know what organizations are in their state working on this, also what the law is in their state. So that's a very good resource. There are AIDS serving organizations in every state. If folks Google HIV prevention or something like that, they'll get to those organizations. In Chicago, we have AIDS Foundation Chicago, which is where Pride Action Tank sits under that. So it was actually AFC, as we call it, that was one of the leaders of the charge to get the law repealed, and did the previous work, but again in coalition with others. Yeah, so those are, depending on what state you're in, there's going to be a different organization. But Zero Project is a great place for people to start. and then sort of go down from there to get to the specifics of their state. There's also an amazing organization that I want to highlight called Positive Women's Network. Um, and I highlight them because, first of all, this is, as in the title, this is women who are living with HIV and AIDS, and they are such a fierce organization of advocates and activists. They have really rich, accessible educational material on their websites. And also links to many other organizations and many other materials.
Wonderful. And I will include the links to these or the three organizations that you mentioned and on the episode page on She.Confidential. So for those of you who are listening or if you're watching and you're multitasking, don't worry. The links are on the episode page, so you'll be able to access these resources.
And another thing I'll add, and because I always try to encourage people to connect to their elected officials, reach out to your state rep or your state senator and say, hey, what is going on in terms of HIV criminalization in my state? They may not know, but you have given them reason to look it up.
Because I'll tell you, I have worked in state government. When you have constituents making inquiries about things, they're wondering, okay, is there something going on that I don't know about? And
I would encourage
so,
all of your viewers to do that and get this groundswell going to change these laws, and also ask them about the state resources for HIV prevention and treatment.
how long has PrEP been available?
Oh, it's been years, years.
I think I just heard about it last year.
And that's the problem. That is the problem. And also we've been, we're mostly Chicago, but also the state, and do some national work. AFC has been working with service providers, trying to encourage them, not service providers, the medical industry, trying to encourage doctors. You should be asking folks if they want PrEP. But a lot of doctors, unless you go to certain clinics that focus on HIV or LGBTQ health, um, they don't know about PrEP. And then they think it's something special that they have to send you somewhere for when they can prescribe it themselves. So that's another pressure point that needs to happen in terms of information about PrEP getting out, is also to work with the medical industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just heard about it last year. I was like, oh wow, this must be new. But then I read something else that said it had been, because I thought it was something that was just available last year, and then I read something else that said it had been available for some years. Like, this is kind of ridiculous that people don't know this. But I also think it goes back to that stigma that's attached around conversations and with our medical providers. And so that's something else. I'm really big on really encouraging women in particular because we know that in women's health, we have to take that extra step to advocate for ourselves a lot of times. It is what it is. And so ask your physician, and we have to be honest, about, what our potential, our activity. If you are sexually active, talk to your doctor and ask them, are there any, tests or preventative measures? What can I do? And that's where Dr. Google might be your friend. Usually I'm like stay away from Dr. Google, but like you said, Google HIV prevention and ask those questions because you have the right to do it. And if your provider is uncomfortable or they're unwilling to assist you in determining if this is appropriate for you, then you need to find another one.
Yes, absolutely. You nailed it. That is absolutely right. Because if your provider can't talk to you about this, that's not the person for you. It's just not. They need to be doing something else. It's the body, y'all. It's the body. It's okay.
Yeah. This is, just like we take multivitamins, we know that vitamin D deficiency makes us more susceptible to every kind of disease because our immune system needs vitamin D. we're inquiring about that. Inquire about these other things as well. We really need to normalize having these conversations and these inquiries. And I think it's starting to change. Yes. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
I just think, these laws have to go. And I hope that we've inspired some folks to, reach out to their legislators and other organizations, perhaps, to see what's going on in their state and to really focus on, like I said, the health care part of this, the public health piece of this, which is about removing stigma, making sure that the resources are there for testing, for prevention, um, for good sexual health for all of us, for
Yeah.
everybody, and not look at HIV as having HIV is a crime. That is the main thing that I want to leave folks with, and encourage also those coalitions out there that if the window is there for repeal, don't sit back to modernize. Go for it. Just go for getting these laws off the books in as many states as we can.
And for those who want to learn more about your organization or your process, what is the website and name again?
Yeah. So for me, as I mentioned, I run an initiative under AIDS Foundation Chicago called Pride Action Tank. So as Pride Action Tank, I was also sitting on the coalition for the repeal of the law, and that website is prideactiontank.org. And just to give a little background, we're a project incubator and think tank on LGBTQ issues. So we do work around aging, financial security, health, housing, safety, and youth. So a lot of different projects that you'll find on our website that are really focused on just helping all marginalized groups looking through an LGBTQ lens in those issue areas.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate and value the work that you're doing and just chatting with me. Thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
So I have been chatting with Kim Hunt. Everyone, I will have those links, all of the links that she mentioned in the website for this episode at She.Confidential. Thank you. I'm Charlene Ketchum. Until next time.